Right, good evening everyone. Hopefully you can all hear me at the moment. We're back again this week at 5 p.m. on a Thursday. I'm your host, Professor NK, or just Nketia for short. And we're here with another study squad. So hi everyone. Tia Worrell, hello, it's good to see you. And also hi to my tutor. Just a massive shout out to the My Tutor mods who are on the chat this evening, who can hopefully answer any questions that you might have that I might not be able to answer immediately. I can see Lyrics has joined us as well. It's nice to see some familiar faces. Lyrics, hi, hope you're well. Emma, good to see you again. I'm well, thank you. I trust you're also well. How is the music? Hopefully it's not too loud. If it is too loud, I will turn it down. Lyrics has said that you can't stay for long because you've got a college interview. Well, firstly, congratulations on securing that interview. I'm sure you're going to absolutely smash it. All I'll say as a bit of advice is in terms of answering questions, don't be afraid to pause and think before you answer the question. And just give it your best shot. I'm sure you'll be absolutely fine. But I'm well, thank you for asking. T has said he finished all your tests for now until mocks. Okay, I see a bit of a slightly nervous face. I'm sure your tests went well. Like I mentioned towards the end of the last session, all you can really do is try your absolute best. And if you tried your best, you have nothing to regret. And at least that way, you then know how you can go about addressing any areas for the next round of mocks anyway. But I hope they went well. I'm sure you tried your best. That's still something to be proud of. Lyrics, any tips for a phone call interview? Funnily enough, I had one not too long ago for some postgraduate research. In terms of tips, like I mentioned before, if you're asked a question, take some time to think about the question before you answer it. I think the common consensus is that you have to answer the question just like that really, really quickly, and that's not the case. Sometimes thinking a little bit about the question shows that you're able to reflect and you're able to think critically, which a lot of panelists actually look quite favourably on. So, that's what I would say there. Don't be afraid to ask them questions as well towards the end of the interview. And by all means, just enjoy the experience. I hope those are a good few tips. If I think of any more, then I will just sort of blurt them out. Well, I'm going to give myself maybe about 5 odd minutes or so before we really get started on today's session, which is all about time management. Funnily enough, here I am talking about how I need to time manage when I start the actual content of the study squad session today. That's quite funny. I can see you have a few more people that have joined us this evening. Don't be afraid to say hi. It would be great to interact with all of you. We really, really love interaction and engagement in the live chat. So don't be afraid to say hi and just drop a message. Do get involved where you can. A couple of other things as well, just routine things. Number one, make sure you check out some of the other study squad sessions that we have going on. You can check out Olivia's, and that's all about maths. That's on a Monday at 5 p.m. You can also check out Fliss's sessions on coding. That's on a Tuesday at 5 p.m. Really interesting stuff. Brilliant live streamers, the both of them. And you should definitely check them out beyond checking out mine as well. So that's one thing I'd say there. Additionally, I would also say that you should definitely check out next week's session. I know for those of you in year 13, you're getting towards that sort of UCAS period of time. I've been talking with the My Tutor team, and we've actually organised 2 sessions focused on UCAS, focused on personal statements, focused on answering some of those burning university questions with regards to admissions that you might have. So definitely make sure to tune in next Thursday at 5 p.m. And the Thursday afterwards, because we're going to be focused on university applications, and that'll be your opportunity to ask me any questions. So definitely tune into that. Ash, hi, good to see you this evening. Hope you're well. When am I going to start the session? I will start the session in the next 2, 3 minutes or so. I don't want to leave people waiting in anticipation. Um, and one last thing, at the end of this session, there will be a survey. And if you fill in that survey, it's just feedback on how you found the session as a student, as a viewer. There is a chance to win £20 from that. So by all means, do complete the survey, please do. Um, I'm sure the lovely mods will pop a link in the chat towards the end of the session, but it's just as a quick reminder. I will probably remind some of you as well later on. May, hi, good to see you again. Hope you're well. Thanks for returning for another session. The audio is quite low. Okay, I will turn up my mic. Is that better, Ishal? Also, hi, good to see you this evening. Is that okay? Quick thumbs up from everyone in the chat. How's my audio? Is it better? Is it still too low? I'm aware of the fact that the acoustics in this room are a bit echoey, so I will speak up, but don't want to break anyone's headphones in the process. But I think I'm just going to get straight into it. So, as per usual, my name is Professor NK, or Nketia, NK for short, absolutely any one of them. And today's session is going to be focused on time management skills. I'm just going to switch the screens and we're going to get right into it. So, I'm going to turn down the music a bit as well, just so we can focus. Just to sort of get started, as a bit of a quick show of hands, how easy do all of you find time management on a scale of 1 to 10? With 1 being, I really struggle with time management, to 10 being, I am perfect at time management. I'd be super surprised if any of you did say 10. If you can, then that's perfect, but just keep in mind that, you know, it's always a bit of a difficult one. T has said probably a 5 or a 6. I think that's fair enough. That's certainly something that I also find challenging sometimes. May has said 5.5. Okay, so averaging around 5 to 6. Rowan, hi, thanks for joining us this evening. You said 8. Okay, so that's brilliant. It's great that you're already on the ball with time management. So it could very well be that you know, there are some of the tips and tricks that I'll mention in this session that you may already be on the ball with. So that's brilliant. Eshal, you have said 5. Okay, again, so around 5. Okay, that's absolutely fine. In my honest opinion, I would say that the score I would give myself really depends. I think it's dependent on what's going on. I think it's dependent on what's busy. I think it depends on the time of year. And I'm sure a lot of you will relate to that. Because time management is one of these really challenging things that will fluctuate, particularly as you progress from GCSE to A-level to undergrad, if you follow that path, and even into the working world. It is something that we're always, you know, forever trying to balance. Okay? And I think one of the things with time management is that there are a lot of myths surrounding it. So one of the myths is that time management is common sense. Now, I personally heard that from many people that I've interacted with, many people I've come across in different circles, different environments, and it could very well be that some of you have come across that phrase as well, that time management is just common sense. Okay, so we have someone else has just put a 1 in the chat. I've seen a 1. So right towards the end, again, that's absolutely fine. That's why we're here this evening. So hopefully by the end of that 1 will become a 4 or a 5, or it'll definitely be higher than a 1, fingers crossed. Another misconception that I think I've definitely heard, and I think I've even been guilty of saying at one point, is that I do really well in school, so I must be good at time management. It's definitely another one that I've heard. Do pop in the chat whether you've heard some of these as well. If you definitely have, it would definitely be interesting to hear some of the myths that you've also heard. I've also heard things like time management takes all the fun out of life. You know, why do I want to schedule? You know, I feel really boxed in. It doesn't give me flexibility. I can't do what I want to do. I can't have free time. That's something else that I've definitely heard when it comes to time management also. One of the ones that I've also heard quite often, especially at university, was that time management isn't a thing because you work best under pressure. Just as a quick show of hands, who here doesn't really plan things or maybe leaves things to the last minute because they work best under pressure? Again, this is a completely safe space, absolutely zero judgment. There are no wrong answers whatsoever. It will just be really, really interesting to see how many of you don't really prepare because you work best under pressure. Okay, so we've had one person say me already, and it's a very enthusiastic me. So it's good to know that you're aware of that. Okay, Rowan, you've also said sometimes. Okay, and I think that reflects on what it is that you might be procrastinating. Emma, you said depends on how important it is. Now that's also interesting. Now, one of the things we're going to talk about towards the end of, or later on in the session, is we're going to talk about how our perception of what tasks we have impacts how well we time manage. So we're definitely going to talk about that as well. T has said that you feel like when you schedule things, put an exact date on them, when you don't do them, you get anxious and get quite bad about yourself. Okay, now that's something I'm going to address on the spot actually, and I think this ties in very, very nicely with what I mentioned before with SMART goals. And SMART goals are something that we've revisited a few times in our study skills squad in our sessions. I think the important thing to remember, T, and this goes for any students who can relate, I can definitely relate, is that when you set a goal for yourself, you need to make sure that it's attainable. Okay? Now, attainable, I'm sure for some may feel very arbitrary, but it really depends on you, and it depends on what other commitments you have going on. Don't feel pressured to set a very close deadline because you feel as though you're giving yourself too much wiggle room if you give yourself a bit more of a lenient deadline. Especially if you know that if you don't make that target, you then feel bad about yourself, and it invites things like anxiety, which can make your experience as a student that much more challenging. Okay? I do think, T, what you said, it's good that you kind of go along with what things you have to do one at a time. I think pacing yourself is incredibly important. But also make sure that you're kind to yourself and you don't set goals which are unattainable, which then results in anxiety, because we don't want that. We definitely don't want that. There's enough to be anxious about a student as it is, and that's excluding, areas where you may have fallen short of your goal for good reason. Okay. Jemima has said, depends on what it is. Understandable. So that's also a very good point. It sort of echoes what I said earlier. And Lyrics, you said that if you plan ahead and don't do it, it makes you want to give up, so you do it randomly. Okay. So I think, firstly, thank you all for answering. Thank you all for getting involved in the chat. I think we're sort of echoing the same sentiment there. Okay. That pressure sometimes works best. Okay, and I am going to sort of touch on how pressure is useful, but in very small doses. It's all about finding that balance. I'm going to talk about that on the next slide. And the last myth I've heard is that you can't really predict the unexpected, so what's the point in putting together a schedule? Now, for those of you who watch the news, I'm sure some of you may have even heard recently that there were some environmental protesters on the M25. Now, without getting into whether that was the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do, I think we can all agree that if you were commuting on the M25 to get to work, that's certainly something unexpected. So let's say you had planned to do X, Y, and Z with the time you had at work. It could very well be that because you were stuck in traffic, you no longer have that time. And so sometimes when you find yourself in that type of situation, you might then think to yourself, well, if this is just going to keep happening, what's the point in scheduling things? Just out of curiosity, are there any other myths that you think of or that you can think of? Any other misconceptions that you may have even said yourself, or you may have heard colleagues say, or even friends outside of school? What are some of the other ideas that you might have around time management, which may not necessarily be the most accurate? I'd be really interested to see what some of you share in the chat. I'm trying to think of one myself. I remember when I was in, must have been A2, so year 13, And I always felt that between the three sciences, because I did biology, chemistry, and physics at A2, I felt like biology and chemistry were my stronger, and physics was the weaker of the sciences after the three. And I always thought to myself, well, I'm really, really good with biology, so I'm not going to schedule in time to go over biology as much, which isn't necessarily wrong, but I think what was wrong was my thinking when I then started saying things like, oh, I don't need to study biology. I always think there's a bit of a need to review things. Okay, so that's definitely something that I'm actually, I can actually say hand on heart that I've thought of and said before. So, moving on to the next slide. The first thing I want to say is that time management isn't always common sense. Time management is very, very challenging if you don't know where to start. And I think, really, for a lot of students, and do pop a thumbs up in the chat if you agree, a lot of students don't necessarily know how to time manage. What do we all think? I did see someone say in the chat, time management only works if you've got free time. That's another really, really good myth. And actually, we're going to turn that idea on its head. Time management works, especially when you don't have that free time. So someone said that you have a mock in a week and you're really, really worried. So I'm actually going to touch on some tips that should hopefully help you with that. And if you do have any further questions towards the end, I'll just stick around for 5-10 minutes just to have a chat with all of you wonderful attendees, all you wonderful students. And hopefully if you have any further questions, I can answer them there. Amethyst, welcome to the stream. You've said yes, so definitely glad that we're in agreement there. Lyrics also said yes, definitely agree. And May, a thumbs up from you also. Okay. And I suppose a lot of students could argue that time management is challenging because you're not necessarily taught in a formal lesson about how to time manage. There's no exam on it. There's no mark scheme on it. Okay. And because of that, you don't necessarily know where to start. Well, it sounds a bit like magic, but I'll tell you something, that time management and figuring it out is really experimental. And it is really dependent on who you are as a person. It's dependent on what your limitations are, what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are. And it's really about finding a rhythm that works for you. Okay? Now, all of you, I'm sure, all have a different taste in music, for instance, right? And so I'm sure some of you may be better at dancing to one genre than another. Time management is really, really similar in that regard. Everyone has their own natural tempo to move to. And so when you know what yours is, you are then able to manage your time effectively by your standards, not necessarily the standards of the person next to you. Just keep that in mind. So another thing as well, I do well in school, so you must be managing your time effectively. Now, this is something which I'm going to challenge because I want all of you to remember that in the context of school, you have a timetable, you have structured lessons. The real challenge of time management is when you're at home or when you're on study leave and you don't necessarily have a schedule. You now have complete free reign as to how you manage your time. And that's the challenging thing because you don't know where to start. Can I get a quick thumbs up in the chat whether we agree with that, whether we disagree with that? Do you find that it's not during school time, but at weekends and maybe during study leave, when you've got massive breaks of time where you've not got a set structure, that you find time management to be the most challenging thing? Or maybe it's after school. Maybe when you're meant to do homework, but you have a bit of revision to do. Maybe that's when you find it the most challenging. I can see a thumbs up from Emma and a thumbs up from Ash. I think that was to the previous question, but still a thumbs up nonetheless. Another thumbs up from May, a yeah from Rowan. And T, you said that you spend a lot of time procrastinating, so time management isn't your thing. So actually, I've got a really fun slide about how to beat procrastination. So hopefully by the end of the session, T, you and everyone else, time management will be your thing. Or at the very least, you'll be on the way to where you need to get to. Another thing as well is that time management doesn't take all the fun out of life. If I would actually argue that time management helps avoid stress. Now this actually ties into the next point that, some people work really well under stress. and so they don't bother with time management. It's no secret that sometimes a bit of stress is a good thing. Okay. And I want all of you to think a little bit about, let's say, making a car, or let's say making a car, for instance. I'm not a car manufacturer by any means, but I'm just using my knowledge of GCSE chemistry here. If you bend a metal, okay, metals are malleable, okay, so you can kind of bend them into shape, and that's because your atoms can slide over each other, right? They're arranged in layers. And if you apply a force, you can bend it into a certain shape, a shape that you want. And that's under stress, that you're applying a force to it. But if you do it too much, the metal will break. And we're really similar in that regard. If you put yourself under a little bit of stress, it can give you a bit of motivation to achieve what it is you want to achieve. But if you put yourself under prolonged bouts of stress for too long, you end up getting burned out, you end up getting really, really tired, and then you find yourself incapable of achieving what it is that you want to achieve. And that's not because you're not capable, but it's because you haven't given your mind the time it needs to recover from all that hard work that you're actually doing. So actually what you'll find is that time management allows you to structure your time in the way that you'd like to, while also factoring in that important you time needed. Rowan, you've said that if you find that if you stop working, you lose motivation, so you just keep going, then you end up burning out. Now, I can personally relate to that, and I'm going to tell you all a really, really short story, because again, time management, and I have slides to get through. So I'm a pharmacist, and during my registration year, which was 2019 to 2020, normally, you revise throughout the year about all the different medicines you need to know, all the different interactions, and then about the law and stuff when it comes to being a pharmacist, and a few other things. And at the same time, you're sort of training, so I was training in hospital. Now, my training year sort of fell around the pandemic, so my exam was delayed, and it meant that I had to continue my training year, but I had to keep working while studying and revising. And what I found really challenging at the very beginning was the idea that I had to pace myself, because I thought to myself, well, if I'm not working, then I'm not learning anything, but that isn't always the case. What you need to remember is that time spent resting is still time useful, because it's time that you're dedicating to your mind to recover, so that when you get back to work, you can work more efficiently. Now, I do actually have a session, I think session 9, which is all about the importance of rest and relaxation, and getting downtime away from work. But it's something I do want to mention now, and at any opportunity that I can, because I think it's really, really challenging for students nowadays. And you end up putting yourself under so much pressure that you end up burning out, and it's not healthy. You always have to make sure you put your mental health first, even if it means taking a walk, playing video games. I, for one, actually pre-ordered Sonic Frontiers on Monday, but I'm currently on holiday at the moment. But as soon as I get back, that will be the first thing that I do before I go back to work on Monday. So it's important to make time for yourself. Rowan, I hope that answers that question, hopefully. But it is something that I'll definitely talk about in further live streams. And finally, with the idea of not being able to expect the unexpected, it's important that time management is still factored in, because if you manage yourself, then even when something crops up that you didn't expect, you can then say, okay, well, I've lost this time, but maybe I can catch it up here. Okay? Time management, I think, is often conflated with a really rigid schedule. And one of the things that I'm going to talk about later is how you can make schedules more flexible. So we're going to go over some really practical tools that you can use as students, really to sort of help you time manage more effectively. Does that make sense to everyone? Does everyone feel like I've debunked all these time management myths? If I haven't, then I'll be sure to text my good friend Father Time and see whether he can give any further input. But does anyone have any questions about time management? Does everyone feel so I've answered any questions around time management before I move on to the next slide? Rowan says, yes, glad to hear that you've understood it, glad to hear that I've answered everything. Anyone else? Does anyone else have any other questions? Or does anyone feel like I haven't answered or debunked a myth about time management? Is anyone still unsure? I'll give it a couple of minutes and then we'll just keep moving. T said, no, thank you. Well, glad to hear. You are more than welcome. Glad to hear that that was really useful. Ash said, nailed it. Good to hear. It means I'm doing this properly. Good to hear that I nailed it. Brilliant. I guess it means I can give Father Time a bit of a break for once. So, let's keep moving on then. I've sort of touched on this already, but the benefits of time management are not a secret. You actually become more productive, you reduce the amount of stress, you improve your self-esteem, and it helps you really achieve a balance in life. Okay, I think, and again, I speak from a personal place. One of the things that's always really challenging is finding that work-life balance. And I even find myself still finding it challenging now. I still find myself juggling things while still trying to make time for myself. And that's where time management becomes important. See, time management doesn't just have to be, I need to schedule in when I revise these subjects. Time management also includes making time for you to get a break. And that's also important, okay? At the end of the day, even superheroes take a break. Now, towards the beginning of the live stream series that I've been doing, and you can actually watch some of the older videos if you check out the My Future YouTube channel, I actually talked about how all of you students are really similar to superheroes. Granted, in the context of all of you, both students and superheroes having goals, but you should also be similar in the sense that superheroes and students need a break. They need a break so that you can save the day. For you guys, it's smashing those exams. For superheroes, it's, well, I suppose making sure that cities don't get smashed instead by supervillains, but you get the general gist of what I'm trying to say. But the question is, how do we actually time manage? Now, I know in the chat this evening, I've gotten the idea that a lot of you don't necessarily know how to time manage, and that's okay, because that's what I'm here for. But if any of you have any ideas about how you might try and time manage, then it would be great for you to share them now. I'm going to share a couple of examples while we get some answers rolling in. What I like to do is I like to make to-do lists. I'll make to-do lists on a daily basis, or I try to do them on a daily basis. And I use the Microsoft To-Do app. It's totally free on the App Store. I think both iOS and Android. I can't see why it wouldn't be on Android. And I like to sort of think about what I need to do, and I just type out on my phone all the things I need to do, but just 10 things a day. And it's really, really satisfying because when I tick something off, it makes a little tick sound, which I suppose releases a little bit of serotonin up there. But it's useful, and I like to use that because it helps me keep track of what I've done and what I need to do, and also lets me see whether what my outstanding tasks are still attainable. Okay, so again, we're going back to SMART goals, still regularly reviewing whether our goals are attainable or not. So Emma, you've said that the problem that you find is that you waste too long working out a schedule and often don't stick to it. Now, I was going to mention this later on, but this is where I tend to find that instead of having a schedule, a to-do list is also useful. And sometimes, depending on who you are, it can be better than a schedule. I agree with you. I didn't work well with schedules. I remember when it came to GCSE, I tried drawing out timetables. And I would spend a good half an hour with a ruler trying to draw out a timetable. But then I would waste time because maybe the margins weren't exactly the same. Maybe I'd waste time because I'd use a different color just to make it look colorful or nice. And I would find that things would happen throughout the day that meant I couldn't even stick to the schedule. So what I would do on a daily basis instead is say, okay, well, what is it that I want to address? What is it that I want to cover today? And then I would give myself 5 tasks to start with. Now I'm at 10. And then I just tick them off as I go along. And that gives me a bit of flexibility. So for Emma, it could very well be that doing a to-do list for you is better than schedule because it means that you can tick things off because to-do list is really quick to do. But you don't restrict yourself to certain times. Give that a go. Rowan, you've said that you give yourself a set time to work instead of a set amount to do, and you find this helps with motivation to get started. I think that's brilliant. Because then what you can then do is by the end of that time slot, you can then say, okay, I got this amount done. I can push myself the next session or the session after that. So I think that's also a very, very brilliant technique. So good on you for trying that. Does anyone else have any other ways in which you could try and time manage? Again, no wrong answers. It's what works best for you. I'm trying to think of anything else that I might do. So to-do lists are quite useful. In conjunction with the to-do list that I make, I also look at my rota or my schedule for tomorrow. So I look at things that I can't move and I then fit things around that. So again, it offers me that level of flexibility. If anyone else has any other tips or tricks about how they time manage, by all means, feel free to pop them in the chat. I will read them and I will champion them because it's really great if you guys already have some techniques that you use. And if you don't have any techniques, hopefully you'll pick some up from some of the examples in the live chat or from some of the things that I've said this evening. Let's keep moving then. So, I've already sort of talked about this, about SMART goals and how they might link in with time management. I think ultimately, goals being specific. Firstly, having a specific target in mind means that you focus on that target. You are less likely to go off on tangents. So that can help you with time management. It can help you really tackle the task at hand in a timely manner. Measurable. So, Rowan, I think yours is a really good example because if your goals are measurable, then it means that if you've given yourself a time period, by the end of that time period, you can then see, okay, what is it that I have achieved and what is it that I've not achieved? You then have a metric to which you can compare your results against. Attainable, so we talked about this before. If you're going to give yourself a set time to achieve a certain amount of work, or you're going to say, I need to get this done today, be realistic. Start slow and build yourself up gradually. Okay? There's nothing wrong with doing small amounts of work in short bursts. Quality over quantity. Make sure you take the time to understand what it is you're revising, rather than trying to rush everything for the sake of rushing it. Emma, you've said that it's hard to write a to-do list sometimes because with things like revision, you don't necessarily know what to write. So that, I think, is a fair enough point. And I think before you make that to-do list, it is always worth sort of looking at a point of reference. So looking at something which you can utilize to help you inform what it is you're going to put on that to-do list. So for instance, what you could do is, let's say you've had mock exams recently. You could look at your results, look at where your strengths were, where your weaknesses are, and then you can then prioritize those. So we're actually going to talk about prioritization shortly. Ultimately, when it comes to time management, and it's all about targets, and that's why I put Robin Hood on the screen, okay? Don't be afraid to revisit your plan and revise it. Schedules are not rigid, they're not set in stone. They can be as fluid as you want them to be. So if you make a schedule and you try it and you realize after 4 days it doesn't work for me, don't be afraid to go back and redo it. Change little things here and there so that it suits you better. Again, we've also already talked about this. Make sure you set reasonable expectations of yourself, considering your habits, your schedule, and other commitments that you have that you can't necessarily move. Now, setting priorities is what I was sort of talking about when answering Emma's question there. But ultimately, it's really about asking yourself what's important and what's not important. And it's really about trying to determine what's important and how we do that. You could use deadlines, you could use exam dates. You could try identifying strengths and weaknesses. So Ash, I can see you've asked, what does SMART stand for? SMART stands for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant to you, and time-bound. These are the 5 metrics that we would want to ensure your goals are. So whenever you have a goal, you set out for a goal, try and make sure that your goal is SMART. Make sure your goal is specific, make sure it's measurable, it's attainable, it's relevant to you, and it's time bound. My very, very first session was about SMART goals. So if you are interested, I would definitely recommend you to go through the My Tutor channel and check out that first session. Can't promise that the production value was as good as it is now, but definitely check that one out. Emma, you've asked me to repeat that. Did you want me to repeat what I said about setting priorities, or was it about SMART goals? Sorry, what was it that you wanted me to repeat? Just to make sure I repeat the right thing. What it stands for? Yep, not a problem. So SMART, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant to you, and time bound. So those are the 5 metrics that your goals should be SMART goals. And again, they are relevant when you're at GCSE, they're relevant when you're at A-level, they are relevant when you're an undergrad, they're relevant when you're working. I wouldn't be surprised if, as you all get older, you come across the acronym SMART later on. You probably will do. I know I've come across it a good few times. But setting priorities, it's incredibly important that you determine for yourself what is important. And I think that's really challenging. How do you do that? So if you're in year 11, for instance, you might think, okay, well, I'll determine what's important based on the results of my mocks. So if I got these grades for these subjects, let's say you got 6s and 7s, which are your aspirational grades, but then let's say in maths, for instance, you got a 4 or a 5. You could then say, okay, well, maybe I focus on maths firstly. I don't necessarily neglect the other subjects, but based on my results, I'm going to focus on maths first. Then to make your goal more specific, you then break that down. Look at your paper. I'm sure if you ask to see your teacher after a lesson or in between lessons, you could say, look, I know you can't give me my paper, but can I just go through my paper? I just want to see which topics in maths I lost the most marks on. And then employing techniques like that can really help inform what you revise and how you prioritize things. Okay, always remember that your teachers are there to support you. And also remember that you also have tutors on My Tutor who are also there to support you. You could also use deadlines or exam dates. So for those of you in year 10, or even for those of you in year 13, you might want to use exam dates to prioritize what you revise first. Ultimately, it does come back to identifying strengths and weaknesses and addressing those weaknesses while still nurturing those strengths so that they don't flip over. Again, ask yourself, have I created a schedule or even a rough guideline? Like I mentioned before, your structure does not need to be rigid. It does not need to be something that is in place that you're locked into. Don't be afraid to revisit your schedule. If you realize your schedule just doesn't work, then go back and change it ever so slightly. It could be that sometimes you deviate from that schedule because you have another prior commitment that you can't really move. That's also okay. The important thing is that you put together a plan with which you can follow, a plan that you can then hold yourself accountable to. Ultimately, the more you plan, the easier it is to time manage. A few other tips that I've come across while planning this session is try and study at the same time each day. It's not mandatory, but sometimes making it a habit then gets you used to it. So you could always try that. Instead of doing massive blocks of revision, try and divide your study time into quite manageable chunks. So that's something else you could try. If you find that you're sat behind a desk and after an hour you just start zoning out, step away. Take a break, walk around, refresh yourself, and then get back to it in 20 minutes, half an hour. Again, it's about finding things that work best for you. Now, procrastination. I want everyone to put a hand or a thumbs up in the chat right now if you procrastinate. Now, I can see 15 people at least who have joined us this evening. Hello, everyone. Therefore, I expect to see 16 hands. I say 16 because I also procrastinate. I'm going to put my hand up. I definitely procrastinate. That's gone up to 16, so now it's going to be 17. So I see 1, 2, 3 people have already said yes. That's 4 so far. So I can see that we have a lot of people that procrastinate. Firstly, do not feel bad about procrastination. Procrastination comes with the human experience. We all procrastinate, and what we procrastinate about depends on what it is. May, also you said that you procrastinate. Again, understandable. Exactly what I was saying, everyone procrastinates. I still do it now. And I'm past GCSE, I'm past A-level, I'm past uni. I think the important thing with procrastination is knowing how to beat procrastination. Now, I'm sure you didn't know that there are loads of different types of procrastination. I didn't actually know that either. There's a type of procrastination that involves you ignoring the task, hoping that it just goes away. There's also a type of procrastination where you underestimate how long it will take, or you overestimate your abilities and your resources. Now, for those of you who like Star Wars, I definitely do. I'm going to reference the prequels. For those of you who know the prequels, you know where Anakin and Obi-Wan are fighting on Mustafar, and Obi-Wan has the high ground, and Anakin says, "Oh, you underestimate my power." Obviously, in that situation, it wasn't a great move on Anakin's part to try and jump up. Okay, in the same way that when we revise, don't overestimate how much you can do, and don't underestimate how much there is to do. It's all about finding a balance. Be confident in your abilities, but also recognize that if there's a lot of work to do, you may need to apply a different strategy. That's something else to keep in mind. Another type of procrastination is telling yourself that poor performance is okay, or the alternative, that you should insist on perfection. For those of you who tend to do the former, it could very well be that you say, well, I'm not really going to revise. It's okay if I get this grade, even though you know you want a higher grade. And for those of you, particularly with notes, I tend to do this a lot, you almost end up spending loads of time rewriting notes over and over again because they don't look the way they're supposed to. Or you start writing on a page and you tear the page out because you're one line off and you start doing it from scratch. Another form of procrastination, okay? Talking about it rather than actually doing it, or putting all your work into only one part of the task. There are a variety of ways in which we procrastinate. T, I can see you've said that the perfection part is definitely relatable. So I guess the question we're really asking ourselves is, how exactly do we beat procrastination? Okay, for those of you who like anime, little manga captions from JoJo, and those of you who have either read it or have watched it know how this fight ends. And that's right, it ends with Jotaro beating Dio, it ends with you beating procrastination. But just remember, it is a regular thing. Procrastination happens to the best of us. Ultimately, when it comes to not procrastinating, it's about employing tactics that again work for you in the same way that time management, the way that is employed is based on how you work and how you think as a student. Win the mental battle by committing to being on time. If you tell yourself that you are going to start studying at 2:30, make sure that you are in the general vicinity maybe 15 minutes earlier. Give yourself 15 minutes to set yourself up. Give yourself 15 minutes to relax, to prepare whatever stationery you need to prepare, and then start at 2:30. Try and keep deadlines as well. Okay, try and keep in mind what's going on around the time of certain tasks that's been set. You can try dividing a big job into smaller ones. What we tend to see with students is where you try and take on a massive task all at once, you're more likely to zone out, and by zoning out, you then procrastinate. Okay? What tends to happen is, let's say you're typing something up, you get bored, you then pick up your phone, you then start scrolling through your phone, without even realizing half an hour goes by, and you realize, oh, I need to get back to work. But then your headspace isn't where it was before. then you've taken away from your ability to really put 100% into it. Make sure you don't make things challenging for yourself. Make sure that you create an environment in which you're less likely to procrastinate and you're more likely to be productive. Now, I actually have a session all about the importance of creating a productive environment. And so I definitely recommend that you go back on the My Tutor YouTube channel and you check out that previous session if you want some nice tips and tricks on how you can create a perfect, steady environment that helps you be more productive. I think one of the other things as well is reward yourself when you're done. Okay, and rewarding yourself takes a variety of different forms. It's something that gives you a pat on the back. You don't have to wait for results day to tell yourself well done. Tell yourself well done when you have achieved a goal, which could be a goal as small as finishing a set of questions that you are practicing as you revise for a particular subject. That is a practice which I want all of you to try and utilize, because I don't think we actually reward ourselves enough. So, where possible, reward yourself, because then mentally you'll then think, okay, well, I feel good about revision. I feel good about overcoming procrastination. Let me do it again. And I know all of you are capable of doing that again. So it'll be interesting to see how you actually do that. And finally, I think this is something that's really, really challenging. Learning how to say no. This is something that I struggle with. As you can probably tell from my energy, I'm a very energetic person. I like to be involved. I like to help out. So for me, this challenge takes the form at work where someone might need to get rid of an extra shift. I'll always be the first one to put his hand up and say, yeah, sure, I'll take it off you. And so what you find is that when you then take on extra things, sometimes it detracts from your ability to achieve your own goals. Now for you guys, saying no takes a variety of forms. In the case of procrastination, it could be that your mates say, we're going to TGI Fridays, do you want to come? If you've already told yourself that on a specific evening you're going to dedicate an hour to revision, then make sure you complete that hour first. Just tell your friends, hey, I'll join you in an hour's time. I've just got this revision to do first. Okay, your friends would understand, I'm sure. Okay, you could always try and suggest rescheduling isn't a word. You can always try and reschedule if a last-minute meetup doesn't necessarily work. Also, make sure you study elsewhere where you won't be tempted to chat or use social media. And texts are a major distraction. Now, we actually had a session where we talked a little bit about distractions before. So it'll be really, really interesting to see how many of you no longer have your phones near you when you revise. Just out of curiosity, who here, since the last couple of sessions, no longer has their phone near them when they revise? If you do have your phone near you, because your phone was never a distraction, that's also okay. I tend to have my phone on me because I like to listen to music while I revise, so I just have Spotify on my phone. But if you know that your phone is a distraction, how many of you no longer have your phone near you? Just pop something in the chat. It'll be really, really interesting to see what some of you say. So May, you said that you put your phone on silent. Brilliant. Emma, you no longer have your phone near you. Brilliant. Rahaf, hi. Thank you for joining us this evening. That's brilliant that you no longer have it near you. Rowan, you always listen to music, so you might have your phone near you. Absolutely fine. T, you say that you asked your mum to take it away from you when it was a distraction. I think that's absolutely brilliant. I'm sure all of you who have sort of tuned in long term have heard my story about how when I think it was my 8th Christmas, I got a Game Boy Advance SP. It was like a Zelda edition. And I was obsessed with playing The Legend of Zelda Minish Cap and Sonic Advance 3. And it got to the point where what Dad would do is he would take the Game Boy off me during the week, and then I could have it back at the weekend. Because it was such a distraction when I was trying to do my homework. But over time, it then just got to the point where the Game Boy could be out, and I was so focused on my work that I didn't even pick up the Game Boy anymore. So brilliant, all of you, that you already employ techniques to help you not get distracted. Really proud of all of you. Well done. Finally, a few more tips from me. Make sure that you note any changes in your schedule. So let's say, for instance, you're on a school production. I think the last school production I was in was Alice in Wonderland. I think the one before that, I did some musical theatre. I was Charlie Brown, for those of you who know the old Peanuts Snoopy cartoon. Um, if you have a last minute rehearsal, then take that into account. You can't miss the rehearsal, but it might just mean that you reschedule your revision time. So just make sure you note down any changes so that you can expect any deviation from your schedule. You could try and preview the upcoming week so that you can then make changes to your schedule if you need to. As you said that you had this app when I would go off the app, the tree would die. It would be called Forest. Interesting. Okay. I'll check that one out. Actually, that actually sounds quite interesting. That sounds like a really interesting app. I'll definitely have to try that one out in case I find focusing challenging. But I think that is everything from me this evening. And funnily enough, I've done it in good time. It'd be very ironic if I didn't, given that the session has been all about time management. Now, as I normally do, I am going to stick around for maybe 10, 15 minutes or so, just so if you have any questions and we can have a bit of a discussion, then by all means you're free to do so. But before any of you leave, make sure that you fill in the survey that the lovely moderators at My Tutor have popped in the live chat just now. I was actually incorrect. It's not £20, it's a £50 Amazon voucher. So make sure that you fill in that survey before you leave. It helps us as tutors, and it helps My Tutor know how to improve the live stream, how to improve the squads for future. And a £50 Amazon voucher could be very, very useful. Who knows? It might be you use that voucher to reward yourself after doing some good solid revision. I know last week we talked a little bit about using it for stationery, like pastel highlighters. So by all means, definitely make sure that you fill out that survey. Again, I'm also going to remind all of you to please check out the other squad sessions that happen on a Monday and a Tuesday. You can join Olivia on a Monday all about maths at 5 p.m. And you can join Fliss for coding on a Tuesday, also at 5 p.m. And as always, you can always rejoin my study squad on a Thursday at 5 p.m. every single Thursday. Additionally, we are going to have a couple of sessions all focused on UCAS and focused on university applications. So if any of you are in sixth form, or if any of you are at GCSE and you are thinking, you start to think a little bit about what you might want to do, or you might want to get a bit of a head start, then by all means do make sure that you join it next week. It would be great to see all of you. If you have anyone else that might also appreciate the support, also make sure that you tell them about it too. T, how many sessions of this are there for your study squad? So we are officially at number 5, and I believe I will have 6 more. So there'll be 6 more sessions of my study squad. And then that's it. I'm sure My Tutor will do another study squad session or another sort of program again. If they do, I would be absolutely thrilled to be asked to do the sessions again. But yes, 6 more sessions with me. But do remember that you can always get help at My Tutor. There's always someone there ready to help you if you do have any questions at all. To answer your question, T, 6 more sessions. Now I'm just going to switch the screen, get rid of the PowerPoint. There we go, excellent. So I hope all of you have enjoyed the session this evening. I certainly have. May has asked, what triggers procrastination? I think that's a very good question. And I think it's a multifactorial issue. I think procrastination can happen for a variety of reasons. For some, I think it's because they have an aversion to addressing the task at hand. If you don't like chemistry, for instance, and you know you have to revise chemistry, it's understandable that you wouldn't rush to revise it because you don't necessarily like the subject. In some instances, people procrastinate because they don't feel confident in achieving the goal. And to that, I would say, try and put steps in place to help you feel more confident. That's something else I would say. So there are a variety of reasons, May, as to why people procrastinate. I hope that answers that question. Now, Rahaf has said, how can you manage revision when there are so many subjects and little time? You struggle with managing everything and you get overwhelmed. Now, that's something that I always tell my GCSE students. I'm sure you've heard like A-level students say, oh yeah, GCSE is easy in comparison to A-level, but I actually think GCSE is challenging because there are so many things for you to cover in such a short period of time. And this is where the phrase, your GCSEs are a marathon, becomes so important. Break up these large tasks into smaller ones. Really identify which subjects you need more support on than others. It's seldom the case that you need the same amount of support across all your subjects. There are some subjects that you just may feel more confident with than others, and that's okay. The important thing is to address the subjects that you don't feel as strong on sooner rather than later. Now, as to how you do that, there are many different avenues. If it's exam questions that you find challenging, then there are websites like Physics and Maths Tutor, which are free to access. Save My Exams is also a good website to get past paper questions. Or you could just go on the exam board website and just get full past papers from there. Ultimately, it is about trying to really not bite off more than you can chew. Take things slowly and start early. There's no such thing as revising too early, but there is such thing as leaving revision too late. So I hope that kind of answers that question there. T, usually you do art, and that takes up most of your time, and you normally leave art until the last minute to revision, and you get art homework every week, which is quite a handful for you. Do I have any advice? Now, this is where I say that I am artistically challenged. So from the perspective of specific art advice, there's not much I can offer there. What I could offer in terms of advice with regards to time management, particularly with art, which I can imagine is a very time-consuming subject, because I see some of the artwork that some of the GCSE and A-level students produce, and I'm blown away. It's absolutely brilliant stuff that you guys create. What I would say is, since you know that you have art homework every week, factor that in. Factor in the fact that you know that art is a regular occurrence in terms of homework, and factor in the fact that you have a lot of time that goes towards art. Then factor in time you would then take to relax, time that you would then take for you time. The remaining time that you then have, think about how you can then break that up to address your other subjects. So it could very well be that you spend more time on, let's say, English language, for instance, if that's one of the areas that you find harder than others. Your subjects don't necessarily need to be prioritized equally, hence why we prioritize them. Okay. Ultimately, the first step is really looking at all of the subjects and really trying to determine what subjects you find difficult and what subjects you find easier. I hope that answers your question. Emma has said Emma also does art, and for her, she enjoys listening to music, speaking to friends whilst doing the artwork because it makes it more enjoyable. So I think that's quite good. I think a lot of the time, artwork, or not necessarily artwork, but talking while working is often frowned upon, but that's not necessarily the case. I think the important thing to remember is that if you create that environment that works for you, that helps you feel more productive, you'll be more productive. And if that means speaking to your friends, listening to music, making it more enjoyable, then that's definitely a technique that you should utilize. So well done for using that technique, Emma. Very proud of you. Brilliant stuff. T, it could very well be that you use something very similar there as well. T has said, what is the best way to make a revision timetable online? Don't know, but let me see. Let me have a quick Google search, actually, as to what a good timetable maker online is. Let's have a look. Canva. So I use Canva for lots of PowerPoints. Canva is actually really, really good. It's got really, really cool templates, and a lot of the templates are free. So Canva is a good one, and you can always go back and edit stuff. There's also Schedule Builder. There's free college schedule maker. I think there are loads out there. I think it's just finding one that you like the look of. So that's what I would recommend there. The moderator has actually put a link to a free My Tutor weekly planner. So make sure you click on that link, guys. Definitely download it. That's actually brilliant. I actually might cheekily save that for myself. So thank you, lovely moderator, for putting that there. Rowan has said, let me see. Let's just scroll up a bit. I'm a competitive speaker and athlete and train 15 hours a week. Often feel quite exhausted and get home quite late. Struggle to find motivation when I've already had school and training. That's absolutely brilliant. Good on you. Making moves there. Definitely proud of you there. It sounds like you do have a lot of extracurricular activities. And they're commitments that you can't necessarily get rid of. And I don't think they're commitments that you should get rid of, because I think they seem to be very, very fulfilling. I think in your case, what you should try and prioritize is that rest. If you're coming home and you're quite exhausted, to expect yourself to work through that exhaustion, I think, is unreasonable. In some instances you can, in some instances you can't. So make the time to rest, even if just for half an hour, just downtime. You're not necessarily doing anything before you try a little bit of work. It could very well be that in your case, you try and do small blocks of revision after you've had a bit of relaxation time. You've had that relaxation, you've had that time to rest, then you can hit the work, you can hit the books. So try using that if you haven't already. Ash has said, can you please show it? I could try and show the screen. What I would probably recommend, though, just to avoid any technical issues, just click on the link. Definitely just click on the link, and hopefully you'll be able to see that there. What I might actually do also is after the session, I will, moderator, could we actually pop a link in the comments on this My Tutor video on YouTube, so that afterwards, if any students watch it retrospectively, they can just click on that link and they can download the weekly planner. That's definitely a really useful resource, so thank you for sharing that. It'd be great if we could do that. Brilliant, thanks so much for doing that. Asha said, thank you, sir. Don't worry about calling me sir. I'm way too young for you to call me sir. So, NK is fine. Don't worry about it. But you're more than welcome. You are more than welcome. Let's see. So what are all your plans for the rest of the evening? I actually have some tuition to do. So I've actually got that very, very shortly. So I'm going to take a bit of time to de-stress, have a bit of downtime. Although I find these live streams really, really relaxing. I find them really enjoyable. So I guess I don't really need time to de-stress. T, you said that you subscribed and that these really help you. I'm really, really glad that these sessions help you. The reason that we put these squads together is to help students like you achieve your aspirational grades and even surpass them. There are no streams without any of you joining, so I'm always really, really appreciative when all of you join. So you are more than welcome. Thank you, and thank all of you for really being a part of putting together a project that will help you and will hopefully help loads of other students retrospectively when they watch these back. So you're more than welcome. The teacher said you're going to finish your homework and then you're going to have a break. I think that sounds like a brilliant idea. productivity, and then a break. So I think that's absolutely brilliant. T, make sure before you leave, you make sure you share that feedback in that survey to get that £50 or to win that £50. Emma, what resources do I use to find out about all these techniques? Very good question. This is where I say it's a secret. No. So my tutor has some really, really good blogs, firstly, that echo a lot of the things I have said. So check out the My Tutor blog. There's loads of content on there, and content's always being added. There are also some really good YouTubers out there that also give advice and tips and tricks. But most of the time, a lot of the suggestions that I make are purely from personal experience. They're purely from trial and error. And that's why I like to stress that no one expects you to get it right all the time, because I certainly didn't. But when you don't get something quite right, you can then make the time to get it right in the future. So that's what I would say there. Right, it is 7 past, well, it'll be 7 past, I'm thinking time zones here because I'm abroad. But I think that's all the time that we have for today. I am going to turn off the stream. But again, it'd be great to see all of you next week, Thursday at 5 p.m. Make sure you check out some of the other sessions. Make sure to fill out the 5-minute survey before you leave this evening. And above all, I will see you all later. But take care until then. And have a wonderful evening. Stay safe, stay productive, and keep being the best student that you can be. See you next week, guys. Take care.